Bonus track, Jia Zhi's morning court at Daming Palace, and Du Fu's responding to Secretary Jia Zhi's morning court at Daming Palace. Okay, so the two poems that I am going to read and briefly comment now are not included in the 300 Tang poems. In fact, as I said in the previous video, these poems are part of an anthology called The Poems from the Masters. So this was a previous anthology. It was composed, I'm not sure exactly, I think it was in the Southern Sung dynasty period. And it's an anthology that includes Tang and Song poets. And this anthology, in fact, the 300 Tang poems was meant to supersede it. The compiler of the 300 Tang poems believed that the previous anthology, didn't live up to standards in the quality of its selections. Plus, it included a lot of the song poetry. So this previous anthology does include the original poem, Jia Zhi's original poem about an early morning session at the Daming, at the Shining Palace. And I think it's interesting to give it a look. Yeah, I think it's probably a very interesting poem because, it will show us the things that have been adapted or preserved in Sun Shen's and Wang Wei's take. Also, this other edition of poetry, this other anthology, Poems of the Masters, includes Du Fu's poem, and I think it's an interesting addition as well. So this is a special bonus track. So let's start with the original, Jia Zhi's morning court at Daming Palace. And it goes like this. Silver lanterns light the sky along imperial streets. In spring, forbidden walls turn bright green at dawn. Countless hanging catkins veil the painted gates. 100 twittering orioles encircle Qianchang Court. The sound of swords and pendants echo up jade steps. Every robe and hat is lined with incense soot, and bathed in waves of grace at Phoenix Pool, and daily stained with ink in the service of our Lord. So, interesting poem by Jia Zhi. And so, for example, the first couplet, as you have probably noticed, includes the idea of the procession of the scholar officials towards the court. So in this way, it starts a little bit like Sun Shen's poem. No cockcrow, though, so that was added by both Sun Shen and Wang Wei. What we do get is, I read the first couplet, silver lanterns light the sky along imperial streets. In spring, forbidden walls turn bright green at dawn. So it's night, it's still not completely morning, but there are silver lanterns on the road. I mean, we're going down one of the main imperial avenues toward the imperial palace. So there's these tiny lamps, which are like stars on earth, illuminating the way. And also, once one gets close to the imperial city, one can see the walls. They're the forbidden walls because the imperial grounds are a forbidden city. They're turning green. It's spring, and there are lots of willows. Those hanging catkins are willow catkins, and there's so many that they are veiling the painted gates. Willows also appeared in Sun Shen's poem, if you remember. It was in line 6, I believe. Yeah, the willows brushing against the flags and the banners. So probably the walls of the Forbidden Imperial City, were surrounded by lots of vegetation, including a big amount of willows. The second couplet. Oh no, wait, I've jumped a bit. Sorry. The first couplet is silver lanterns light the sky along imperial streets. In spring, forbidden walls turn bright green at dawn. The catkins appear in the next line, so we just get greenery on the walls of the Forbidden City. We might imagine that from the top of the wall, the scholar official running to the palace can see the tops of trees, which can be willows or other green trees. The willows appear in the next line, in the second couplet. Countless hanging catkins veil the painted gates. 100 twittering orioles encircle Qianchang Court. Very good example of a parallelistic couplet. So we have the catkins veiling the gates, the orioles encircling the court. So the image in this second couplet is, quite clear. It's we're getting close to the palace, and we get natural elements that surround the palace. Trees, or in this case catkins, they are veiling the gates, so they're forming a dense tapestry around the gates of the palace, and 100 twittering orioles encircle the court. Yeah, so it's also full of birds. Qian Chang Court, just a fancy name for the palace, based on the name of a pavilion or a construction from the Han Dynasty. And this is very typical recourse of Tang poets, naming things based on past glorious things. Third couplet. The sound of swords and pendants echo up jade steps. Every robe and hat is lined with incense soot. So now we get the move inside the palace. The scholars are entering the palace, and this is represented through smell and sound. So the sound is of the swords of the bodyguards of the troops inside and the pendants of the scholar officials ringing. And besides the sound, you have a smell. Every robe and hat is lined with incense soot, so they smell of incense. The clothes of the courtiers are, incensed, so that they will be pleasant for the other courtiers and the emperor, I imagine. Swords and pendants, that also appeared in Sun Shen's poem differently, a pattern of swords and pendants in the courtyard while the scholars were waiting. But we get this image, the scholars and the soldiers that are escorting them march into the palace. Last couplet, and bathed in waves, every robe is lined with incense soot, and so the last couplet continues this train of thought. And bathed in waves of grace at Phoenix Pond, and daily stained with ink in the service of our Lord. Not only are the robes lined with incense soot, they're bathed in waves of grace at Phoenix Pond. So the courtiers are close to the emperor, and they receive the waves of his grace. And again, Phoenix Pond is working here as a metonymy for the secretariat. And daily stained with ink in the service of our robe. So the robes are lined with incense soot, bathed in waves of grace, and stained with ink, because the scholar officials have to write at the secretariat draft documents and edicts. The reference to the Phoenix Pond is perhaps the most common image that is retained in both Sun Shen's and Wang Wei's version of the poem. They both finish with a reference to the Phoenix Pool. Okay, so now let's take a look at Du Fu's take. Du Fu was also working at this time at the imperial court. He was a censor working at the secretariat, I think. Let's take a look at his take. Responding to Secretary Jia Zhi's morning court at the Daming Palace. The sound of night-long dripping speeds the shaft of dawn. Spring within the inner gates intoxicates the peach trees. Dragons writhe on tapestries in the warming sun. Tiny birds soar above on the faintest breeze. Incense spills from our sleeves after court. Pearls pour from your brush into a poem. How do generations learn such gossamer art? By the pond, today, I found a phoenix feather. So here we have Du Fu at his best as usual. And I would say out of the three poems based on Jia Zhi's poem, Sun Shen's, Wang Wei's, and Du Fu's is the more meta-literary, I would say, the one that more clearly seems to connect with the original poem, not in its content, but in its referencing to Jia Zhi directly. So let's take a look couplet by couplet as usual. How does Du Fu start? First couplet. The sound of night-long dripping speeds the shaft of dawn. Spring within the inner gates intoxicates the peach trees. Like almost all of the poets, the first couplet is about morning, about the beginning of day and the beginning of service at court. The image that Du Fu seems to be using is that of a clepsydra, a water clock's arrow, which indicated when it was time for court. So the sound of night-long dripping, so clock, 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 the water coming out of the clepsydra, seems to be pushing to speed the shaft of dawn. Dawn is imagined as a shaft that is being pushed or shot, or speeded up at least, by all these small dripping sounds, every drop that fell from the clepsydra through the night. So it's quite a shocking, quite a surprising image to begin with, although references to clepsydras appear in a lot of poems about the court in Chinese poetry. And spring within the inner gate intoxicates the peach trees. It's spring, and instead of focusing on the willows, Du Fu references the peach trees intoxicated, drunk with spring inside the palace. So they're probably at their best beautiful, or we are to imagine them as, intensely green and perhaps with some budding flowers. Second couplet. The second couplet, like some of the previous couplets, focuses on objects, so we don't really get a clear procession as in Sun Shun's poem. We don't get either a description of the whole or elements of the whole of the imperial presence, but we do get, in this couplet, we get two glimpses of two images, one artificial, one human-made, and the other natural, two patterns of beauty, Wen, that are perceived within the precincts of the palace. Dragons writhe on tapestries in the warming sun. Tiny birds soar above on the faintest breeze. This is a textbook example of a parallelistic couplet. So dragons, birds, writhing, soaring, above on tapestries, in the warming sun, on the faintest breeze. This is a very good example of a parallelistic couplet, and the parallelism has been clearly shown in translation. So the whole couplet includes the images of creatures moving as a reaction to the spring weather. So remember, spring, the eastern wind of spring is supposed to bring things alive. The eastern wind of spring brings life, brings renewal, brings love and all the flowering of the world and of society, because of how Chinese scholars associated the human and the natural realms. So there's this image of creatures stirring under the influence of nature. The first image, of course, it's not a real thing. It's a tapestry, so it's a painting. It's a cultural artifact. Dragons, which are symbols of imperial rule. Dragons ride on tapestries in the warming sun. So inside the halls of state, there might be tapestries showing dragons, and they seem to move in the golden morning sun. Tiny birds, and these are real birds outside, soar above in a faint breeze, in a nice soft spring breeze. Third couplet. Incense spills from our sleeves after court. Pearls pour from your brush into a poem. So the third couplet actually locates us out of the morning session, out of the morning audience, to immediately after. What happens after? Incense spills from our sleeves. So this inclusion of incense is probably meant to echo, to connect with the reference to incense, to every robe and hat lined with incense soot in Jia Zhi's poem. So the courtiers are coming out of the court, or at least of the morning audience. Their incense is spilling, or at least the aroma of incense is spilling from the sleeves. And another very good parallelistic couplet. A precious substance, a nice aromatic incense is spilling from the sleeves of the courtiers, but a different substance is spilling from Jia Zhi. Pearls pour from your brush into a poem. Yeah? So the poem that Jia Zhi created is equated to pearls. Its words, its characters are pearls pouring from the brush of Jia Zhi into a poem. So there's a pretty direct flattery and a very well constructed inclusion of the image of scholar officials walking around with incense and Jia Zhi's own composition of a poem talking about that. Finally, the conclusion. How do generations learn such gossamer art? By the pond today, I found a phoenix feather. So again, the poem ends with a reference to a phoenix and the phoenix pond, connecting it with Wang Wei's and Sun Shun's poem, and of course with Jia Zhi's poem. But it's a completely different take. It's a beautiful, very delicate and flattering take. So Du Fu is asking himself the rhetorical question after having praised the wonderful literary craftsmanship of Jia Zhi's pearly-like words and poems. He says, how do generations learn such gossamer art, that is, the art of writing imperial rescripts and of composing poetry like you do? Gossamer refers to the emperor's silken and never-ending edicts, which Jia Zhi was in charge, among others, of composing. So Du Fu asks rhetorically, how do generations learn this? Well, he's going to say how. By the pond, today, I found a phoenix feather. A phoenix feather by the phoenix pond. The phoenix feather fell from Jia Zhi. So this is also, this connects birds of a feather. This connects with an image. Du Fu is likening Jia Zhi with another writer of rescripts from the past, Xie Chaozeng, whose name meant phoenix, who, like Jia Zhi, was a composer of imperial edicts, and who, like Jia Zhi, his father, had also been a composer of imperial edicts. So he worked this Xie Chaozong for Emperor Wu of the Liang dynasty in the 6th century, and the emperor had allegedly described him thus: "You are so capable, you must have phoenix feathers." So here Du Fu is saying, you're like this guy from the past. You must have phoenix feathers, and you lost one here on the pool the other day. So, lovely takes, and I think an appreciation of these two poems greatly enriches what we have been reading up to now and complements the 300 Tang poems.